Welcome back, David, after a big Vegas trip.
Yeah.
Mr. Olympia weekend. Probably not going to cover any of that today, but we will cover understanding hormones. What the hell are hormones? How are they made? What's happening there? Because we hear it a lot. There's a lot of noise in specifically with females, for example. Hey, I've got hormonal imbalance and this and that, but nobody understands what the hell does it actually mean. So, can you open up and kind of explain how hormones are made?
Yeah. I think the easiest one will be just the to pull up a chart that we've shown before, right? But that way we can talk to it, and it might even make sense of like starting to actually paint an accurate picture of are hormones, how are they made, and when and what they actually are, right? Like when I say what are they, what I really want to know is where do they come from and how are they being made in the body naturally, right? I understand, right, if you take a synthetic hormone or even a bioidentical hormone, but it's exogenous to you, that's different, right? Because if you understand how they're going to be made and what they actually are communicating inside your body, then you can make a much better assessment of how you should or should not use them, right? So I'm going to pull up
Yeah,
a
because there is a process of creating that hormone, right? That
correct.
involves different things that people completely miss out and say, like, oh, I'm just going to take this because this is low. But yes, there was a process involved to create this thing. And maybe somewhere in that process, there was something extremely important for you actually to maintain your health instead of just jamming something extra in your body and thinking everything's fine now.
Yes. So if you look at this diagram, you can see that it starts with this star right here, which is cholesterol, right? That is the starting place for all sex hormones and catecholamine hormones, right? So it starts right there, and then vitamin D is a pro hormone, but it's not. It's labeled as a vitamin, so it's not on this sheet, but it is. It does exist in the same pathway, and it's right here. So I'm just going to scribble that in. So we have vitamin D, pregnenolone, and DHEA. That's like the first tier of things that get made from sunlight interacting with the skin and cholesterol molecule. That happens, obviously, with sunlight. So that's going to happen during the day, not during the night. More importantly, we know the specific light frequencies that make vitamin D, pregnenolone, and DHEA, and they all happen in the UVA to UVB transition period, right? So what that means is there is a specific time of day that hormones are made under natural conditions. That's all that means, and that's all that you should take away from that is that at a specific time of day, and the timing is not related to the clock. The timing is related to what time of day is UVA and UVB going to be exposed coming through the atmosphere and interacting with biology, right? Every animal on the planet. And
And
that's
for
what
this, I just want to add that I personally see it a lot that with advancement of quality of life, now we have lower vitamin D levels because people just don't want to go out anymore.
correct, right? I mean, and it's again, it's not good or bad that like you mentioned, quality of life has gone up. What does that really mean? It means that life is easier. That's what it means, right? It means that life is easier. It does not mean life is safer. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're healthier. It just means life is easier. Not as much effort is needed to be alive from day to day compared to before, right? And that's not true. And just like you said, what's made it easier? The ability and the technology to have shelter basically 24/7 all the time. And that behavior is what starts to circumvent some of these processes. Under normal conditions, most of these processes would happen daily or semi-daily, right? Obviously, there isn't sun all the time, and it's not like you could be outside all the time, 24 hours a day. So for and that's also how hormones work. They are think of it like global, for the whole body, the whole biological system. They're global interpreters of how much metabolic work has happened with the environment, right? So all of this encompasses, right? All of that right there at the top are stages of different light interactions and different processes in the body, all coming from how much light you received, right? That's all that is. So when you start taking any of these synthetically, let's just say testosterone, for example, everywhere where the testosterone interacts, right, once it leaves, the production process. So in men, that would be your testicles. Once it leaves and starts being disseminated to all the body parts, your brain, your muscles, everywhere else, what those places are interpreting, right, your brain, your skeletal system, your bones, your muscles, all of those, what they are being told when there's lots of testosterone is, hey, this person has a lot of anabolism. They have interacted with a lot of sunlight, and by default, all of these body parts, all of these body systems over here that are interacting with synthetic testosterone, by default are assuming that there's lots of DHEA, that there's lots of pregnenolone, right, adequate to the whether you're male or female, and lots of vitamin D, because all of those should have already happened by the time there's lots of testosterone in the system. Does that make sense?
I just recently looked up the highest levels of testosterone, and I believe the highest ones were in the places that hasn't have so much urbanization, I believe is the right word, like
Mm.
Mongolia, Ethiopia, things like that. I think Mongolia was like 3.5 times higher than average testosterone in the US.
Right, right. Yeah, that's kind of interesting to bring that up, especially with that environment, right? Mongolia is not necessarily a tropical place, right? They have sun, right? But it's more northern, it's higher latitude. So how are they having such high testosterone? It's because they just spend more time outside. Just like you said, they're less modernized, so there is no real need to spend as much time inside. Just the fact and the act of being outside more often than being inside immediately starts to change this whole equation, right? And so think of it this way. So think of it like um, adding testosterone. Is that going to give you energy? Maybe, maybe not. Is that going to give you sex drive? Maybe, maybe not. Like we've discussed this earlier. Like everybody thinks that testosterone is the solution to a lot of the problems, and really, it's the tail end of a lot of problems, right? If you have low DHEA, for example, you might feel exhausted. Why would you feel exhausted? Because of this pathway right here. Let me clear this up so it's a little bit more clear. Um, DHEA flows the cortisol under specific timing sequences, right? This enzyme, and this enzyme are all related to other sequences or other frequencies, I should say, and those are related to infrared light that happen in the morning. So, AKA, when you interact in morning frequency light, more DHEA gets moved to cortisol for wakefulness, for being able to be active for the day, and all of those types of things, right?
And
So
before you
you might
go
be
down that
taking this stuff.
deep rabbit hole, do you want to dump it down? Where do the enzymes come from? Because I think that's kind of we have touched about it many times before, but I think it's important to acknowledge as well.
Correct. Yes. Those enzymes are being created by the mitochondria, right? They're being created by the mitochondria with by folding specific proteins, right? And those proteins are going to come from food, or from your own body, right? And any proteins that are being metabolized, right, being used in metabolic systems, which is basically all of them, are going to be folded, right? That's what's called protein folding by the mitochondria. The thing that's providing the energy for that is going to be electrons, right? Electron transport chain is what's going to be driving the ATP production of moving the ATPase in a because it's basically a wheel that's spinning, and on one end it's folding proteins, and on the other end it's spinning out ATP. That's the process of folding the proteins to make the enzymes, and the enzymes, right, this is a key part, have to be hydrated. Right? And that hydration is also coming from the same process that makes ATP and folds the proteins. It's the process of electron transport chain that makes the CO2 that you breathe out and the water that stays in those cell membranes. And that water, that hydrogen in that water, is used to hydrate all of these enzymes that you see on this page. So
So from
mitochondria is
everything you just said, would it be correctly to assume that somebody who is fit and healthy and eats well-balanced food is less likely to have any kind of hormonal disruptions?
as long as step number one is being realized. So in other words, they're doing everything that you just said, but they are also going outside at appropriate times of the day, right? As long as that is happening, yes, most of these will be checked just by the act of waking up and interacting with the environment outside, which also means that you're interacting with the environment correctly inside because you're eating whole foods that have been grown outside, foods that are of high quality made by nature. You're getting the correct interaction of the environment that's outside, both internally, the foods that you're putting in, and externally by just going outside at specific times of the day. Now we're going to focus on the hormonal timing of things for right now, and what that implies, right? What is the right timing, right? Um, and that goes to here, right? If we know that this is middle of the day, so noon, right? Let's just put a hash mark right here in the middle of the page for noon, and this will be AM, right? So that's going to be AM right here, and this is going to be PM right here. Anything before this action of cholesterol being interacted with to form all your baseline hormones, vitamin D, pregnenolone, and DHEA, those all finish at noon. They start at about the halfway point of sunrise to noon. That's where they start being made, and noon is where they get cut off, right? Because we also know this strong, really strong UV light destroys sex hormones, right? So let's put it this way. If just like there's an on switch, right, this transition of UVA to UVB for the manufacturing of hormones, there is such a thing as you can make too many, right? There is such a thing as you can make too much vitamin D or have too much vitamin D in the system. Now, under natural conditions, that's not possible. Why is it not possible? Because under natural conditions, really strong UV light, specifically UVB, starts at noon and goes until about 2 p.m. That is a big window of really strong UV light, and that starts telling the system, hey, we need to stop the manufacturing of hormones because our time has passed, right? That is what timing actually is. It's not just when things start, it's also when things end, and it's all regulated by the same mechanism, right? So if you unintentionally disrupt that for whatever reason, but you know what it does, you can essentially circumvent some of this. Like for example, in the winter, if you know you're not going to be initiating these processes, cold exposure instead of sunlight exposure turns on these processes. So it looks like this. Morning light initiates the cascade of turning on all the enzymes, right? The hydration of the body. And at the same time, it moves DHEA to cortisol so that you're awake. So you're going to be awake, and all enzyme activity is going to be upregulated by making sure that you get daylight exposure in the morning. If it's in the summer, it's going to be accompanied with a lot of heat. And if it's going to be in the winter, it's going to be accompanied with cold. So basically, it's bright daylight accompanied with either heat via the sun in the summer or cold because the sun is weaker in the winter, right? Once that signal has been hit, you've started the enzymatic process and the wakefulness process. The next step is getting UVA and UVB at the same time, right? To move that cascade down the line. In the summertime, that's pretty easy to do. You just step outside at that time of the day appropriate for where you're at. If it's in the winter, it's actually easier because now the timing is not regulated by UVA and UVB light because it doesn't exist. It's just regulated by the UVA and UVB light you create when you get cold. So you can actually turn that process on and off multiple times throughout the day.
That's why it's so powerful to kind of wash your face in a cold water in the morning, right?
Yeah, wash your face in the cold water, ground during the day, just stepping outside. You're basically having so during the summertime, right? If you go and look at okay, when does UVA transition to UVB and when does UVB become really strong? For the most part, in the summer, that's about 3 hours, right? 3 hours of manufacturing time for most people, depending on where you live. In the winter, you're just basically trying to accumulate something measurable, right? 30 minutes of cold exposure throughout the day. I'm not saying at the same time. It can be at the same time, but just accumulated throughout the day. 30 minutes is enough to eat into this window enough that you make some vitamin D, some pregnenolone, some DHEA, and some testosterone. And you did hear that correctly. In the winter with cold exposure, you can still make some of these hormones because these hormones are dictated by frequencies of light. When you get cold, your body makes its own light, and it has a combination of infrared and very low UV, and that UV is in the UVA, B, and C range.
And it's something important that you said without saying it, is that it happens kind of in like pulses. You
Yes,
can't just press the accelerator down and expect that nothing's going to break and go all day through, because a lot of people kind of reach out to me and say, oh, I want to have a lot of energy. I'm like, when? And they go like, what do you mean? I want to have energy all day. I'm like, that's not how your body works. You
correct.
need to kind of pull back at some point. You need to assess yourself and then give yourself maybe 15, 20 minutes to go outside, guard the energy for next hour, 2 hour spurt of cognitive work or physical work or whatever it is.
Yes, yeah, that's a very important point. Yes, I'm glad that you brought that up. It's for most, if you were to step back, right, and not label any of these events in a 24-hour clock, that's what you would see, right? If you just pulled back and looked at a month of hormone productions, right, and you didn't know day times, right, you didn't have time stamps, all you would see is pulses, 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 right? And that's exactly what the body does, because the body is regulated by start and stop points that happen in a pulsatile nature.
Hmm. And it's
Right.
a super important thing to kind of acknowledge as well. When I go to these Tony Robbins events that a lot of people know I do, he has a timing for when he gives you a break without telling you he gives you a break. He doesn't give you a break of doing nothing, but that break involves a lot of movement for like 10,
Hmm.
15, 20 minutes. It's just moving as much as you can. That's his break. And
Yeah,
then you
and
sit
that's a
down and
form of
learn.
energy creation, right? We talked about that, I think, in the last video, right? All energy transformation, right? Moving around is a form of electrical energy transformation called piezoelectricity. So it's a way to take a break and gather energy and kind of restore the balance of using your brain for large periods of time, by just moving around, right? Now, those are all the things that we talked about in the last video of like energy transformation. Little things like just jumping up and down for 5 minutes is enough to put enough electron flow back into the system that you might feel better and not have brain fog, right? And that's that. I'm sure that's what you're referring to, right? Just a bouncing session, or just everybody kind of
Yep.
even chanting, right? Like your vocal
Little
cords
rave party.
vibrating.
Yep.
Yeah. All that type of behavior is literally going to put energy back into the system, just like something much more passive and much more quiet. Go outside for a walk, around the building and then come back inside. Same concept. They're just being done with different energy systems.
So tell me about the cost of disruption, because we both deal with a lot of people who travel a lot, go from time zones to time zones, this and that, shift workers, and so on and so forth. So what is actually happening there? Before we go into strategies, how to minimize the damage, is there a damage from
Yeah. So
disrupting
so
this?
luckily enough, when it comes from a hormonal aspect, let's just say you I don't know, had a week of you didn't get outside, right? For whatever reason, right? Um, did you significantly disrupt all your hormone production? The good thing about hormones is they are long-term actors. They are so important with relaying information to how much light and energy that you've interacted with, that they hang around for a long time through other processes. One of them in particular is called sex binding hormone globulin. Some people may have heard of it, some people may have not. Basically, it acts like a savings account for when your hormones are being made, so that it binds them up. Think of it like an automatic savings account, right? You're just making money, right? You're making hormones, however you do, whether that's cold exposure or sunlight exposure, and you for the most part can't really tell how much you've made, right? And that's not really your job. Your body, to the degree that you've made sex hormones, will raise or lower your sex binding hormone globulin in coordination with light. So in other words, as vitamin D starts to go down, as melanin production starts to go down because the season is changing, your body raises sex hormone binding globulin because it knows that the majority of the sex hormones have already been produced. So it needs to bind some of them up so that it can use them throughout the winter, right? And that's how cold exposure actually influences sex hormone production in the winter. When you get cold, it lowers sex binding hormone globulin temporarily so that it can release some of these hormones that it's been bound to, right? So actually, once you get in the habit of knowing that this is how this works, this is kind of like making money. You may make a ton of money in 1 month if you're appropriately how would I say, structured, right? You have bank accounts, you have several different accounts where you know, hey, I need to save some of this for later because I might not make the same amount of money next month, but you know your budget, right? That's what the internal cues and other hormones like sex binding globulin hormone, that's what they're cued into, right? They're cued into the signs that tell you you're going to make a little bit less or you're going to be making a little bit more, and they get regulated by those signs so that as the season ends, it goes, oh, that was most of the sex hormone production for the year. Let's bind up 80% of it or whatever it dictates is appropriate because it knows the time of the year through these timing mechanisms, and it can expect, oh, we have another 6 months of low production. Let's save more. And anytime we get cold, we need to reinforce that stress effect, that hormetic stressor, with releasing some sex hormones for daily activity. You see what I'm saying? All of it is balanced. So missing a session here and there probably isn't going to be something that affects you negatively. It's only when you start missing more than 50% of production time, right? So think of it like your best performing months of the year from a financial perspective. Let's just call it that. Hey, I know that these 3 or 4 months of the year when I make most of my money, it makes sense that if you miss 50% of that time, you've cut 50% of your money for the year. You see what I'm saying? That's more how you need to look at this type of behavior, this lifestyle type of behavior is, am I going to be missing 50% of my money making time? And if the answer is yes, then you're in trouble. We need to start figuring out how to get a loan or how to supplement that, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here is, okay, if you know that your account is going to be on E when you come to, you can't make that kind of money anymore or that kind of product anymore, that amount of product, then what do I supplement? Do I supplement baseline hormones, right? Which is what I would suggest, right? Things like DHEA and pregnenolone, so that your body can still make them into testosterone and others. If the assessment is you can still make these just fine, your enzymes aren't shot. It's just the baseline interaction. But on the flip side, I've seen it the other way around as well. People interact with the outside environment just fine, right? They make enough vitamin D, they make enough DHEA, but the hormone doesn't flow to testosterone and their cortisol is all messed up. That has more to do with enzymes now. So now, if we're looking at the enzymes being the problem, what's heavily involved with that? Hydration, cellular hydration, where you live, how much water you drink, what kind of lifestyle. Do you get enough infrared light in the morning to turn on all those enzymatic actions, right? So that's how you can start to diagnose where do you pour most of your effort. Is it the sunlight thing, right? Getting a tan, or is it actually the hydration part and you need more infrared light, right? Uh, and so those timings, right? Infrared light specifically, um, that timing is more related to the bookends of the day, right? So you can supplement those. We have a lot of data on that by maybe getting an infrared light therapy box or an infrared light sauna of some kind, and getting infrared light on top of getting some morning daylight. You could enhance that effect, and you could do it again in the evening because that's another appropriate time for infrared light therapy, right? And so if you have an enzyme problem, now it's lean into the red light, lean into the hydration type stuff. If it's not that, hey, because I've seen it both ways. Hey, I make enough testosterone, but I'm tired all the time still, right? Like, and most of the time it's a guess. And if you're talking to a doctor, he just prescribes you more testosterone, right? Like you go in, you get your testosterone tested, it's like 700 or 800, which is good. That's really good. But yet you're tired and you're having low T symptoms. And so the doctor just gives you more testosterone. But then if he would have just looked at your DHEA and your cortisol, they were low. That's actually what's going to drive being awake and being functioning, right? Being wakeful and not tired. And so the appropriate call in that situation was not more testosterone, it was more DHEA so that you can turn it into cortisol to be awake for the day, or something that facilitates DHEA to cortisol, like licorice root extract. That will bump the DHEA into cortisol and make you more awake for the day, right? So there are little nuances that pay big, big, big dividends if you know what you're looking at as far as how these work and the timing of some of these things.
It's sounds like there are some low-hanging fruits for somebody who kind of listened to all that and like, what the hell does all of that even mean? And I'll try to translate. So if somebody travels a lot and they feel like they having these energy slumps and all those kind of things, when you talk about cellular hydration specifically, for example, doing cardio can actually do that, right? Because when you burn
Yes,
certain nutrients, specifically fat, I believe it was per 100 grams of fat utilized, our body creates around 109 grams of water, but for 100
correct.
grams carbs, it was around 50 grams of water. And obviously, when you consume it from like meat products and fat, it's going to be more deuterium depleted fluid as well. So you actually get better hydrated if you have that steak for breakfast, go for a run, and not reach for the cheesecake and glass of beer or red wine at night to wire yourself down, right? Because you,
Yeah,
you, you feel
100%.
like
It,
you've been
it, it
running
also
around.
goes back to some strategies that bodybuilders have used, right? Hey, I'm going to carb up and only eat carbs for a whole day, and I'm going to look, extra lean and extra dry for the next couple of days. That's literally this mechanism that you're talking about. Carbs are going to pull water, any water that's in the body, into the cells, and at the same time, the carbs that are being metabolized are not putting more water back into the system. So you're going to look drier and you're going to have more glycogen, right? And on the flip side, you eat a bunch of fat, you eat a bunch of beef. You don't necessarily look watered down, but you're going to clearly feel and see a textural change at the skin level, and that's water related, right? Because you're literally creating almost twice as much water. So yes, that eating strategy is going to influence cellular hydration. Also, the type of water, we touched on that, will influence cellular hydration. You mentioned the cardio uh, movement, right? The Tony Robbins thing. Movement of any kind is going to cause metabolism to ramp up a little bit, and depending on the amount of effort. And anytime you ramp up metabolism, you also enhance water production. Red light therapy also enhances water production because it enhances ATP production. Um, Cold exposure also enhances cellular water hydration, and also heat exposure. So like heat shock proteins upregulate hydration capabilities and stuff like that. So basically, if you just kind of group those all together, anytime you interact with the environment, you bring up cellular hydration. And anytime that you eat natural foods that come from animals, those are mostly always going to have more natural fats in them, animal made fats. Those are also going to enhance water production. So you can kind of put those all together in, hey, if I do any of these or do them all, I'm going to maximize water production at the cellular and biological levels, which is going to take care of a lot of enzyme production.
Yeah, so if there is somebody who travels a lot and is really concerned about disruptions, low-hanging fruit would be wake up early with a allocated time of the day that is specific for the time zone. Try to eat low processed foods if possible when you're traveling, and try to be as active as you can. And then when you come back home, get into good routine because that will limit any kind of disruptions that can otherwise be affecting you, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, that's a very, very concise way to kind of do that. That's how the system works. That's always towards where you want to end up at whenever it's disrupted by travel or whatever it might be, right? Staying up late for specific conferences or meetings or whatever, right? The moment you can get back on track, that's the moment you start fixing things, right? And the longer you stay on track, the more robust you make it so that when you do go off track, it's very easy to put it back on.
So how do you go from balance into like a power? How do you design a routine that makes you even better than you already are. Like higher cortisol spike in the morning, higher testosterone spike in the afternoon, or stuff like that. Can we do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. So it's a rhythm, right? So what that means is there are highs and lows, right? That's natural. That should happen, right? Just obeying the natural rhythm of waking and going to bed and interacting with the environment will give you points of the day where you have really high cognitive and physical capabilities. Most of that for humans is going to come between the hours of 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's your time to go when it means you got to use your brain or you got to use your body at a very high level, right? The highest level that you can produce. It's almost always going to be between that 11 and 4 p.m. time frame. So you start mapping things out that are very important to you. It could be work related, goal, hobby related, whatever it might be. Those are the important bits. Put them right there, right? And then as far as like going from small rhythms, right? Because just going throughout the day and doing these things doesn't involve being uh, very intense. It can be, right? But for the most part, it doesn't have to be, right? It's just the rhythm of your day. You're going to have highs and lows. To enhance them, meaning get more out of whatever you're doing, right? You can enhance the highs or enhance the lows or both. And the volatility, right? The amount of gain, the amplitude that you make from the lowest low and the highest high, that is performance, right? That is performance. That means that so for example, my lowest low during the day could be taking a nap, right? From a physical cognitive perspective, right? I could take a nap an hour before, let's say I'm going to train with weights, around 3 p.m. or something like that. I can take a nap around noon, right? Get a very, 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 very low in terms of everything, and then wake up an hour before I'm going to train and go outside for some sunlight right before, and that starts to amplify from a low to a very, very high high. And that very high high, I could amplify it. How could I amplify it? Right before I eat, right before I go into train, maybe 30 minutes before I train. Most people would be familiar with, I'm going to take a pre-workout. What's that going to do? It's going to bring up cortisol. It's going to bring up catecholamines. I'm just going like, could it be with a pre-workout? Yes. Would that be what I choose? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on what I'm going to do, right? But anything that amps you up is now going to bring up that curve. So now you've gained performance from a low low to a high high of high physical and mental focus. So now you can execute for a short period of time, an hour or 90 minutes, very, 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 very well. So that's kind of like the extremes of what you can pull off as far as understanding that there must be a low before there's a really high high. And wherever you want a really high high, that means performance. Right? That could be physical performance or mental performance. In this scenario, I classify it as probably quite a bit of mental performance, but very high physical performance, aka I'm going to go do a workout that's important to me, right? So I'm looking for high physical performance and pretty good mental performance. So what's the opposite of high physical performance? A nap. A nap is the opposite, right? I'm not going to do any movement. I'm just going to completely relax my body physically. So that's the opposite of that. I put that before at the appropriate timing, and then I start raising physicalness, right? So 30 minutes before, what I would do is go outside and just jump around a little bit, throw the football around with my kids, run a little bit, just get my body moving and feeling good, just a little bit, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then boom, go in and do the workout. Now I'm going to have high physical performance, pretty good mental performance, and I'm coming from a state where my body did not have any interruptions of being prepared for that.
Yeah, and would you implement some kind of strategy to cool you down? Like I always ask anyone I work with, do anything between 7 to 10, 15 minutes meditation or guided breathing to make sure
Yes.
that
So,
that
so
high does not overextend into rest of their day.
Yes, I would totally do that, especially if that act, there's going to be more to follow, other things, right? Not necessarily more of the same, but I still got to go do other work or I still got to do other things, right?
So let's say you
Then,
train first thing in the morning and then you have heavy office work meetings, all those kind of things. This would be ideal, right?
Yeah. Then now you're dealing with, okay, I had a high of physical performance, and now I'm expected to have one or maybe two other highs of mental performance, right? So now the nap before that training, which if you're doing it in the morning, the nap was the night, right? The whole sleep session before. But point being, that like if you were going to work out at like 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. and then you had an important meeting at like 5 or 6 p.m. with somebody else or something, that would be like, hey, you definitely need a nap around noon, because not only are you going to go and physically perform at 2 or 3 p.m., you're going to need some mental performance after, at a
Mm.
time of the day when mental performance is already starting to decline. You're going to need a nap or some way to relax, right? It may not need a nap. Maybe if you're, like you said, maybe you're going to need some meditation at the middle of the day instead of a nap, maybe because you can't take a nap, but you're going to need some really down mental and physical time if it goes, I'm going to work out and then I'm going to have some mental stuff to do after, for sure. Yes. So that again, most of what we're talking about right here, we haven't even talked about the protocol. We've just talked about the timing. The timing is literally more important sometimes than the protocol.
And I believe the biggest takeaway of all this, because I'm conscious of your time that I need to let you go, is that understanding how important it is to appreciate that your body works through cycles, not just seasons go through summer, spring, and autumn, and all those kind of things. Your body goes through excited, calm. And when you develop the power to be excited and calm on demand, is when you're going to be at your best. That's when your hormones going to be starting to get all clicking and running, and so on and so forth. I lost you for a second.
You froze for just a second. You're not frozen now.
Yeah, I just said that it's basically understanding these peaks and valleys that can give you so much power to execute at your highest when it actually matters.
Absolutely.
Thank you, David, for your time, and we'll dig deeper in next videos.
Awesome, man. Have a great day.